Hi, I'm Mike Berry, the owner of Underwater Criminal Investigators, also known as UCI. In this next video, we're going to go over, one of the public safety divers' favorite thing to do in practice, and that's tying knots. And what we're going to do is use this video, as a training video, and also a review for some of you that, have those knots mastered. And so we're going to start with the bowline, go over half hitches, a sheet bend, and then a figure 8 on a bite. Hope you enjoy. Let's go over some of the basics. Notice with my left hand how I'm just holding the line. And so my left hand's kind of controlling the rope, and the standing part of the rope is the part I'm actually using to tie the knot to. And then the running end is either the end of the rope that I'm using to tie the knot, or I can create a bite in the line and actually use that as the running end if I want to tie a knot with a bite. And so you get the standing part and you get the running end. All right, and then again, with the fingers of my left hand, I'm controlling the line. And notice how my palm is facing the camera, or facing my eyes, and I'm not blocking the rope or holding on to the rope. And so many people grab it like so, and it's kind of awkward, especially when the conditions get rough, to actually control the knot and tie the knot. And so I'm, again, just holding it within my fingers. And so the first part of the bowline, which is the most important part, is creating the loop. And I'm going to create the loop in the standing part here. And the way I create the loop is I approach it with my right hand, and my thumb is down, and I grab a few inches below my left hand, and I flick my wrist, making a loop, and I stick it in the fingers of my left hand. And notice my fingers are just controlling it, just like I said, is that now I can see it. It's basically all there. I'm just holding the line with a couple of fingers. And so this would be incorrect, this would be incorrect. You're kind of shooting yourself in the foot before you even begin. And so what I have my students do in class is do that at least 10 times. So it's thumb down, flick your wrist, make a loop, stick it in the fingers of your left hand. And so they'll do that over and over again until they've mastered that loop, because that's the key component of a bowline, is that loop. And there's so many ways to tie the bowline, and I don't care which way you tie it. The question is, can you? Can you tie it, especially when the conditions, get rough? And so there's the loop. And so then what I'm going to do to finish off this knot is I'm going to take the running end, and I'm going to come up the loop from behind, and I'm going to go around this standing part. Now some people say, the squirrel, the snake, the beaver, or whatever you want, comes up out of the hole and then runs around the tree, behind the tree, and then, back into the hole. Whatever saying you want to say, the point is you're coming up from behind, you're going around this standing part, you're going back in the hole, and then addressing the knot, which is also known as tightening the knot, is I'm going to grab these two with my right hand, and I'm going to actually tighten the knot by pulling on this tree or on this standing part. And that's how the knot sets itself. And then it has a very, very distinct look to it. And notice you've got the running end is in between this loop that I created. And in class, I call it the wanger. And so you want to kind of feed it, manipulate it to where you've got enough wanger there to tie this thing off. We're going to create a safety, which is the next knot we're going to cover. The loop is very important, not just the way you tie it, but, also the size of the loop. And so, by following this technique of thumb down, flick your wrist, notice as I grab the line and I bring it around, basically I'm creating a loop by using that technique about the width of these 4 fingers. And so that's a large enough loop underwater, for you to feel, to manipulate, to tie the knot with. So it is important, the size of this loop. And so, making a loop, like that would be kind of difficult, especially when you can't see and you're wearing 5mm gloves. And a loop, like so, is just, this large is so awkward, it's crazy to even think that you can, tie something successfully there. So practice, when you're making that loop, not coming down too far on this line, but just come down probably just below that little finger of yours, and then create the loop, sticking it in that left hand, or those fingers of the left hand or the right hand. All right, so as you practice, I want you to also concentrate on the size of the loop that you create, that you're sticking into the fingers of your controlling hand. All right, so what we're going to do next is I just want you to practice this knot, and that's how you get really good, is just practice it, until you master it. And that's what you're after, is mastering all these knots. And so just as a quick review, you're going to hold it in your left hand or right. So let's say a lot of people say, well, I'm left-handed, it doesn't work that way. There's no excuse, you just reverse it. So I would simply be holding it in my right hand with those fingers, and my left hand, thumb down, flick my wrist and make a loop. And so, there's no point in arguing. It's actually easy if you know how to do it with either hand. All right, so as a review, we're just going to hold it in our left hand with some of the fingers, palm facing us, thumb down, flick the wrist, make a loop, stick it in my left hand. Then I'm going to take the running end and I'm going to come up and I'm going to go behind the standing part and I'm going to go back down. I'm going to grab these two. So you got this loop here. I'm going to grab this part of the outside of the loop I created along with the running end, and I'm going to address the knot by pulling the tree, just like so. All right, to kind of step this up a notch, I'm going to show you, how we tie a bowline within the system, and that's using a bite. In this case, I'm using a mushroom anchor, which is a major tool for a UCI diver. Any kind of weight, but we kind of prefer mushrooms. They have a lot of advantage on jack stays and different search patterns we do. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to imagine, instead of a 4-foot piece of rope, this is a 100-foot piece of rope, and I'm rigging a jack. And I'm rigging it raw, so I don't have any carabiners, I don't have any, fancy things connected to it. I've got a piece of rope, a couple of things that sink, and a couple of things that float. And so what I would do is I'm rigging that jack, or I'm rigging onto something, and I'm going to tie a bowline within the system. I'm going to feed it through what I'm rigging to, and then if you notice, I've split that line in half. And so on this top half, I'm going to create my loop. And so my thumb is down, I flick my wrist, I make a loop, I stick it in the fingers of my left hand. On the other side, so let's say this is leading to my up and down line, my ascent and descent line, and this is going to be part of my search line that's laying along the bottom for a jack. On this part of the line, I'm going to create a loop, a bite. And so again, this is in my left hand, that's your loop, this is your bite. And so notice how I've captured between the loop and the bite, what I'm rigging to, and in this case, it's a mushroom anchor. And so I'm going to take that bite and I'm going to go up, from behind my loop. I'm going to bring it around that tree or that standing part. I'm going to come back into the loop, and I'm going to grab my tree and I'm going to pull. And so it's very important when I pull it. Notice how I'm pulling this one. You know, normally we grab these, and you certainly can, but for some reason I have a tendency to just hold on to this loop as I'm pulling with my left hand to address the knot. And so again, before I drop this overboard, I would make sure that this knot is addressed nice and tight. You know, what's cool about this nylon line, the right nylon line or rope, is that when you address this and this gets wet, it actually gets tighter. You know, you try that with polypropylene and you'll actually see, the knot untie itself. And nylon won't do that if you know what you're doing with nylon. So what we just did was tied a bowline within the system, and we rigged to something. In this case, it's the mushroom anchor, but this could be, a motorcycle, this could be a mini bike, this could be, anything we're gonna lift. If I needed to, extend my lifting strap on a lift bag, I could certainly use this knot, which is what I usually do. And normally in class, when I jump from knot to knot, I'm showing you actually the order in which I teach it. And so I start with the bowline, and then I jump to the next knot, which is your half hitches. And so, I use it to cover a couple things. One, a safety, and then two, to how to tie a half hitch. And so if you notice when I tied the bowline, I manipulated it where the running end or the wanger had some length to it. It's because I was going to, control it and use it to tie, another knot. In this case, it's a half hitch. And so depending on what school you go to, one hitch or two hitch, creates a safety. And so with a bowline, if I want to make sure that bowline, doesn't come untied, or any knot that I'm using, I can create a safety to safety off the knot. And so in this case, I'm going to create a safety in the bowline. And the way I do that is I simply tie a hitch. And so I take the running end, and you see this standing part of that loop that I had created. I take the running end and I simply tuck it within itself like so. And then I'm going to address that. And then, what I've just done, is as simple as that was I created a safety, or in this case, a hitch in the line. And so in some rope schools, one hitch isn't a safety. You need to create another hitch. And so I simply put another one in there. And so I want to address that, tighten it up nice and tight. And so I just safetied off, my bowline, either with a hitch or two hitches, and it depends on what mood I'm in. Sometimes I'll use one, sometimes I'll use two. And so that's your second knot, is hitches. And so in my world, one hitch is a safety, but if I'm going to tie off to something using hitches, I want to do two or more hitches. And so, I wouldn't want to tie off to a ski buoy or something with one hitch. That's simply going to come undone. But a couple of hitches into the system, and those hitches addressed, using nylon, it'll lock in there and it won't come undone during the operation. All right. So once again, going from a bowline, which is a good way to move to the next knot, I take that running end that I manipulated and I gave it a little length there, knowing that I was going to safety off the knot. I take my running end and I go around real simply and I address it. Now I just control this with my left hand, and then I tighten that hitch into it. And so that's one hitch, which in some rope schools that could be a safety, but if it's not, you just add another hitch. So you've added a couple of hitches into the system. All right, what I'm going to do next is just show you how to tie hitches onto something else other than creating a safety on a knot. And what I'm going to use, you might not have seen these before, but these are the original ski buoys. And so, back in, the early 80s, I would say about 82 or 83, I was on a search. We used to use old Freon cans for our jack stays, and I was looking for a body that I believed had floated, and I was searching this cove, and I see these two red balls on the shore, and I brought the boat over and jumped off the boat, and it's kind of, so a lot of times you see one ball that's floated somewhere, but two of them together was kind of odd, and it didn't have this hook on it. It was just this thing right here. And in my day, this was to me this was a tether ball. And so, I used to play tether ball as a kid, on the playground. And here's two tether balls, which is kind of weird. And so I showed everybody, I found these two tether balls, and someone said, those aren't tether balls, those are ski buoys. And I said, ski buoys, like the ones we see out in the lake? And they go, yeah. And I said, oh. And so I started looking at them, and I got the idea maybe I'd try them on a jack. And that's where ski buoys, the use of ski buoys came from on a jack. Is, when I started teaching in '85, I started, sharing the use of, Freon cans and the advantage of ski buoys. Now, these are the originals. Now they're, my favorite color is yellow, but I, personally, when I'm diving with my department, I use my originals. So I still use these, even though they're kind of deflated like me, but they get the job done. And so, how do you tie off? Let's say I'm going to do a jack stay. I'm going to tie off, to a ski buoy. And so you simply just feed the line through, just sort of like we had in the jack. And you're going to take that line, and then you're going to create a hitch. And so that is simply a hitch in the line. But you can tell if I just simply do that, and I've seen people do this, like they don't have a brain in their head. You're going to tie a hitch and think that's going to hold. It won't hold. One hitch, in my world is a safety. Two hitches is a knot. And so you want to just come around and bring in another hitch. And so again, with any knot, the secret to getting these things to hold is to address it and keep it nice and tight. So you want to, before this goes into the water, you want to make sure the knots that you're using are nice and tight. And remember, when that gets wet, that gets tighter. All right, our next knot, the third knot, is a sheet bend. A sheet bend is used to tie two ropes together. And you don't have an opportunity, a lot of times you're taught this knot, and for years and years. You might tie the other knots, but this one doesn't come into play. But in UCI diving, this one comes into play quite a bit. Usually when we're setting up a number of jacks, or we've got a lot of jacks in the water. I'm talking about jack stays for you non-UCI guys. Jack stays in the water, which is our #1 pattern. It's a moving grid line. And you start running out of rope, so you have to start tying them together, or looking for rope and tying an extension just to complete the pattern. And so this knot is used to tie two pieces of rope together. Now in class, they have a 4-foot training rope, very first day of the UCI class, and we go over knot tying, and then every day we practice our knot tying, just, so the student gets used to the knot. And so I'm going to show you that method first, using that same line. And so what I tell them is, what I'm telling you is, on one end of the training line that you're using, you want to create a bite. And so on one end of one of the ropes you're going to tie with another rope, to lengthen your line, you tie a bite. On the other rope, you're going to take the end of its rope, the running end, and you're going to come up the bight. All right, and then what you're going to do is go around the bight. Now notice, let me draw your attention to something. Notice in the knots that we're tying, from the bowline to the hitch to now the sheet bend, notice my left hand. The palm is facing, my face, or in this case, facing the camera. And notice my fingers of my left hand or my right hand, depending on which way I'm doing it. And so the technique is there. The hand position is there. It never changes. And so, with my left hand, I create a bight in one end of one rope. I take my other rope that I'm going to tie to this rope. I take my running end and I come up. And I go around the bight, and notice how my left hand helps in that process. So I'm manipulating with my left hand. Now this is where a lot of people make a mistake. Is once I come up my bight, sort of like a bowline, I come up from behind, and in this case, after I've done that, I go around that bight. What you don't want to do is go back in the bight. If you go back in the bight, you're simply creating a square knot. And so with this sheet bend, which is a knot used to tie two ropes together, I don't do that. And what I do with this running end is I tuck it within its own self, within its own body. So what I do is I tuck it under there. Now another mistake people make when you tie the sheet bend, because you're basically looking at a sheet bend right there, is when they tighten it or address it, they grab hold of that running end. That's a major mistake, and I'll show you why. What you want to do is just simply grab the bight. So my left hand has never stopped controlling it, and I grab this end of, or the standing part of the other end of the rope, and that's how I address it, is I pull, and then the knot sets itself. All right? And so a tendency for a lot of guys that have never really tied the knot is it just seems that they're going to pull this. And what can happen is as you're pulling this, or you're just pulling this single running end right here, this loop here can fall forward and actually, untie itself. And so you're trying to avoid that. You're trying to learn how to not only tie it, but address it and tighten the knot correctly where the knot sets itself. And so don't hold on to that running end when you tighten it. Just simply pull these two and this one, and it locks in there in place. It has a very distinct look. You have this running end shooting off to the side. And so that's your sheet bend. Now, you could do a double sheet, and all that is as you're tightening it, you just bring this loop one more time around, like so. And then as you tighten it, now you've addressed it. So I would pull that a little bit. There's your double sheet bend. I normally don't do that, even though, I have done it. Normally when I get into the sheet bend itself like so, let me wait till the camera gets back into focus. I'll tie this off with a hitch to create a safety. All right, so once again, I'm going to take one end of one of the ropes I want to tie together. I'm going to create a bight. I'm going to take my other end. I'm going to come up from behind. I'm going to come up that bight. Notice my left hand is controlling it. Notice my fingers are controlling that running end. And I'm simply going to go around the bight, all the way around. Don't go back in the bight. I'm going to tuck it within its own body. And then when I address it, I'm pulling these two and this one, leaving that running end alone. And there's your sheet bend. All right, to step this up a notch. So now I've added in this other rope. And so you notice, one's a different color. It'll help you, see what I'm doing or understanding what I'm doing. And it's also a little bit bigger. And so when you're tying these two ropes together, if you've got, ropes of different makes and ropes, different sizes as far as their diameter, what you're going to do is the bigger rope, you're going to create the bite in the bigger rope. So if I'm going to join these two ropes together, the larger one has the bite. I take my other rope, I come up from behind, go around my bite. In this case, I'm going to manipulate it a little bit. And then I pull the 2 and pull the 1. So there's the sheet bend. I could go around one more time and double it. Or I could safety it off by tying a hitch. And again, in order for all this to work, it's very important that I address it nice and tight. So that's a sheet bend with a safety. Our last knot is a very well-known knot. It's used in rope rescue, mechanically tethering a diver, creating a loop at the other end for a handheld arc. It's very, very popular, and it's a figure 8 on a bite. And so to tie this knot, what you're going to do is create a big bite. Now I know with this camera angle, I just want to give you the length of my bite that I've created. So you're going to create a big bite. And so notice my left hand again. Remember the techniques I've been talking about throughout this video. It's a method to our madness. And so, the use of my hands is basically always the same. And so, again, I'm looking at my palms. I'm controlling the bite with the fingers of my left hand. And I'm going to create a figure 8 on a bite. And so I've created a long bite, and I'm going to come down below my fingers of my left hand, thumb down, and I'm going to grab both of those lines, and I'm going to create a loop. And so there's a loop. So there's a loop right there on a bite. And so I'm showing you, I tie the figure 8 on a bite in so many different ways. This is how I teach it in class, and it's about the easiest way. I know how to teach someone how to tie a figure 8 on a bite. And so I start off just like if it was a bowline, except I've got a bite in my hand, and it's thumb down, flick my wrist. With those two ropes, I make a loop, stick it in my left hand. And what I'm going to do here is the thumb down, but this time instead of grabbing the standing part, I'm actually grabbing the loop that I created, thumb down, and I'm going to twist that one more time. So that's all I've done. And then I'm going to take the loop, the end of that bite, and I'm going to stick it through that loop that I just created. And I'm going to create a figure 8 on a bite. And it gets that name because it looks like, the number 8. And so usually with a figure 8 on a bite, because of the way this knot is tied, you don't have to safety it off. It's not going to come untied. And so once again, what I do is I create, a long bite. Depending on the size of this loop that I want to create at the end of my figure 8 on a bite, it depends on that hand position of that left hand, how much of this do I capture. And so in this case, I'm going to come down, thumb down, flick my wrist, make a loop, stick it in the fingers of my left hand, thumb down, flick that loop one more time, and then I'm going to take the end of my bite, stick it through the loop, and then pull. And there's your figure 8 on a bite. If you're not ever, looks like this, which in class when someone's learning how to tie a figure and a bite, it looks like this a lot. It just means you didn't twist it that extra time. All right, and so again, you've got your bite, thumb down, flick your wrist, make a loop, stick it in the fingers of your left hand just like you were tying with the bowline. Thumb down, grab this loop you created, flip that one more time, twist that one more time, take the end of your bite, go back through the loop, and then pull. And you can see because of that extra twist, I now have a figure 8 on a bite.